Who are the greatest bench pressers of all time in modern raw tested powerlifting? Let's find out. And yes, number 2 on this list did in fact bench over 3 times his body weight. So let's get into the criteria. Now, this is going to be similar to my criteria that I had for my greatest squatters of all time video. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. But again, obviously the impressiveness of the lift is what I'm predominantly judging this on. So IPF/overall world record, and how long those world records have stood for. Again, IPF world record set in international competitions with international judging. Overall world record is just straight up the heaviest weight lifted under raw tested conditions. And the second criteria, just like with my squatters video, is the ability to use the lift to win. So this isn't just straight up ranking the most impressive single bench press lifts, right? Or who's held the world record for the longest. It's also about applying this somewhat subjective criteria, which is that lifter's ability to use it to give them an edge over their opponents, to build that subtotal, to pull themselves either back up after the squat event or just out of reach after the subtotals before deadlift comes, right? How much of a bench press specialist are they, and how have they used that to beat their opponents and give them the edge? And an extra caveat before I get into the list is this is going to be full power meets only, right? So my second criteria kind of negates having any bench press only lifters in this. For those that don't know, there are bench press only competitions and bench only worlds, and there are several amazing lifters who have competed bench only. Guys like Dennis Sierri, Daiki Kadama have held world records for ages, and some of them have done full power meets with a token 100 kilo squat or deadlift just so they can lay claim to have the heaviest bench press ever in a full power meet as well. However, I'm not ranking them because, again, that kind of goes against my second criteria there. The whole point of that is how much of a bench press specialist are these people and how much edge does it give them over the competitors? If bench is the only event, that kind of negates that. So this is full power meets only. Now, all that's out of the way, let's get straight into the list. So number 5, Owen Hubbard, the 83 kilo lifter. 218.5 kilos is his best lift that he did at a European Championships, and that is still the current IPF and overall 83 kilo bench world record, and he has held each of those for quite a while now. This was set back in 2018, I believe. So here we are 6-7 years on, and that record still stands. Now, Owen Hubbard is a lifter. I believe he set his first world record in 2015. So the fact, and then he went back and forth with Brett Gibbs for a bit and eventually PB'd in 2018, and no one's come close since. Now, one thing I will say is elbow depth, right? Now, this is something that's going to come up again in this video, especially with a particular lifter, the one that I mentioned who benched 3 times his body weight at the number 2 position. Elbow depth is a bit of a controversy here. For those that don't know, in 2023, IPF introduced a rule that when you bench in the bottom position, your elbow has to be at least below the top of your shoulder joint to hit elbow depth. And that, a lot of lifters who were using the leverages and their mobility with the arch to their advantage kind of suffered from that. Another change that was made was the setup. Owen Hubbard was a lifter who had this very funky setup where not only did he have his feet up on the bench, which you're no longer allowed to do, he arched so far back, he had his nose touching the bench, created this massive arch, and was able to lift that way. Now, with that being said, this is a screenshot of his video before the 218.5, and that is still a pretty decent range of motion. When he's in that bottom position, the elbow depth is, in my opinion, passable. So I don't think the elbow depth had much to do with his fall off. Yes, his bench numbers did dip post that rule change. However, I just think age caught up to him, and he's just not as strong as he used to be. Still a phenomenal bench presser, but 218.5 is out of reach for himself, just like it is any other 83. The 183 that I think may get this is Joe Borenstein, who hit 220 in training, but hasn't been able to replicate that in a meet yet. So we shall see how much longer this stands for. But as of now, Owen Hubbard is my number 5. Number 4, Ilyas Bukhalim. You just know that you have to have the super heavyweight world record holder somewhere on the list because he has the heaviest bench press, right? 291.5 is the heaviest bench done in the IPF. It is the current IPF and overall bench press world record, and Ilis Bukhama has held that world record for ages. He first broke it all the way back in 2000 and let's say 14 or 15. I think it was 2014, and he's pretty much been upping it and chipping it ever since. And I believe he set this record in 2022. So for all those years, he kept chipping it, upping the record, and eventually 291.5. And it seems like in the last few years, he's fallen off a bit now. Probably gotten a bit older, past his prime a bit, but again, there's not really any super heavyweights that are super close to this record, apart from perhaps Jesus. Jesus has done 600 pounds, so 272.5 in competition. And I believe I've seen 280 from him in training. Although that wasn't recent, that was a while back now, over a year ago, I think. So maybe Jesus takes a run at this, but again, it's hard to see anyone beating the Algerian in this bench press event. Number 3, Sergey Fedosienko. Now, I know that I said this is also about how much, aside from the impressiveness of the lift, it's also about how the lifter is using that lift to win. Fedosienko was very much a total specialist. He held both the squat, bench, and deadlift world records at a particular point in time for extended periods in each one. He was that far ahead of his competition. However, if I'm ranking each one of his disciplines in his lift, I'm saying that bench press was the most impressive. 171 in the IPF, 172.5. Those records are untouchable by any other 59. As a matter of fact, Fedosienko has held the IPF and overall bench press world record over 4,600 days as of the time of this recording. That is literally back since powerlifting day 1, modern raw tested powerlifting day 1 in 2012. That's when the IPF had its first Raw World Championships. That's when the modern era of powerlifting really started. And ever since that day, Fedosienko has been the best bencher in the 59s. And no one's come close since. He's upped that world record. And I believe in 2016/17, that sort of era is when he set these best numbers. And it looks like his numbers have come down. We saw him compete at the Asian Championships December of last year, just quite recently. And I believe he benched 150 something or 160, I want to say. I think it was 155 or something like that. So it looks like his bench press strength has come down a bit, but he's still the best 59 bencher out there. I mean, Wasker is 150s in training, I believe, but he's still over 15 kilos below this. I don't think he's touching this world record. I don't think anyone is, to be honest. And the other thing I will say is, yes, you can say smaller range of motion. Fedosienko is just a smaller human being a 59, short wingspan, right? But that is a photo of his 171 done in 2016 IPF Worlds when it's on his chest. And that is elbow depth for days. His elbow is way below the line off the top of his shoulder. So you can't say that he's one of these lifters that really exploits a tiny range of motion. Although our next lifter kind of is. Number 2, Eddie Berglund. This is a lifter that benched over 3 times his body weight. This is also the lifter that probably was the reason why the IPF introduced the elbow depth, because this was the stereotypical meme powerlifter, 2-inch range of motion bench press that got the sport made fun of for a while there before IPF decided to change it. So before I go into that, let's talk about his lifts. As a 66, he benched 213.5 kilos. As a 74, he benched 212.5 in the IPF, and 218 is his best ever overall. Now, the 66 lift that he did there is absolutely out of this world, and he first took that world record back in 2014, and he upped it eventually to that 213.5 kilos in the IPF, which is ridiculous, right? So he's held that world record for ages. Now that was before the rule change. So that top left photo you see there is his 213.5 world record bench press as a 66. And you can see the bars on his chest in the bottom position, and his arms are damn near almost locked out. And yeah, that's definitely not passing elbow depth because his elbows are above the line of the top of his shoulder. Now, the thing I will say though is Eddie Berglund can't really help how he's built. He has a super short wingspan to begin with, but not only that, his ratio of his upper arm to his lower arm is such a way that even if he took a super close grip, he would hardly be hitting elbow depth, right? Now, the photo on the right is his world record 74 kilogram bench of 212.5 in the IPF. Former world record. It was beaten by Chun Chia Fan at the same competition. But you can see there that the adjustments he made, this is post the elbow depth rule, and that lift was given as a good lift. And you can see there that his elbows are definitely lower, and he has more bend in his arms. Still borderline, but he did make an adjustment, sinking more into his chest, all that kind of stuff. And he was able to set a world record there as well, although that has since been beaten. But I don't think anyone is beating a 66 bench, elbow depth or not. That's just hugely impressive to be benching over 3 times your body weight naturally in a tested federation raw is just ridiculous. And Shell is probably the closest person who can break that record, and even he is far away. I think we've seen him bench, I think 205 was a recent bench that he did in his last sort of SBD kind of heavy session leading into Sheffield. And that 205 looked hard. There's no way he has another 8.5 kilos on top of that in the competition. So, yeah, if Shell can't do it, no one can. That world record is going to stand for a very, very long time yet to come until some freak just comes out and breaks it. But yeah, honestly, going by the impressiveness of the numbers as well as the duration of the world record, as well as the fact he has it in 2 weight classes, Eddie Berglund probably would be my number one if it wasn't for that question mark around his elbow depth and how the fact that you can't help but shake the fact that it's just not as impressive, right? However, number one on this list has no issues with elbow depth, and that is Mr. Bench Press himself, Jonathan Kaiko. The 93 kilo lifter, 245.5 kilos is his best ever lift. That is the IPF and overall bench world record. He has held that since 2021, so not as long as some of these other lifters, not anywhere near as long as some of these other lifters, in fact. However, he's held it since 2021, and he's been chipping it ever since, every year, reliably adding a kilo, half a kilo onto it until he's got it to this point. But the reason he's number one on my list, 2 things. First of all, absolutely 0 issues with elbow depth. You can see there's his world record bench, or one of them, right? It might not be the 245.5, but it was somewhere in that range. And you can see there, no issues with elbow depth at all. So you can't look at this lift and think, okay, it's just one of those meme powerlifting benches that don't really count. No, this is a legit bench press. Second reason is the second criteria that I had, the ability for the lifter to use the lift to win, and given that edge over their competitors, that describes Jonathan Kaiko's bench to a T. Jonathan Kaiko, the reason why Kaiko has won so many 93 battles is because of his bench press. There are people that outscore him, people that out deadlift him. His bench is consistently above the competition, and by a long way too. Like, most of his rivals are benching closer to 200, and here he is over 40 kilos above that. That gives him a huge advantage after the subtotal and leading into deadlifts. Jonathan Kaiko is the definition of a single lift specialist and a bench press specialist who has used the event to string together some of the most impressive head-to-head wins in the history of powerlifting. You talk about his wins at World Championships, his head-to-head wins at Sheffields against, the guys he's beaten, the likes of Gavin Aiden multiple times, Gustav Hedlund multiple times, Emil Krastev. These top 93s in arguably being the most competitive weight class these last few years. Jonathan Kaiko has come out on top more often than not, and that is due to one of the predominant factors behind his success has been his bench press, and that is why he is number one on my list. So, yeah, while the numbers or duration of the world record may not be as impressive as some of the others, Jonathan Kaiko is my number one. He's my greatest bench presser in the history of modern raw tested powerlifting. Let me know if you agree or disagree.